Hello, everyone, and welcome to the SISU Peak Performance Podcast. Today, we have with us Dr. Lindsay Ross Stewart. She's an associate professor in the Department of Applied Health at Southern Illinois Edwardsville University. She's the director of mental performance at Stride Fitness and Training, and she's also a sports psychology consultant. Previous to that, she was the director of mental performance at SIB Athletics and the exercise and sports psychology graduate program director. She obtained her PhD in psychology from the University of North Dakota, her master's in kinesiology from the same university, and her bachelor's in psychology from Mount Allison University. Currently, she's teaching at the graduate level courses in sports psychology, professional standards and ethics, diversity and culture in sport, psychology of coaching, and the final seminar for all exercise and sports psychology graduate students. Lindsay is a certified mental performance consultant and an Association for Applied Sports Psychology CMPC registered mentor. Lindsay, super excited to have you here with us today, talk about sports psychology, which is one of the topics that I love the most. And very, very excited to have you here. How are you doing today?
Good. First, thank you very much for having me and for that very kind introduction. I'm excited to talk all things mental performance with you today.
That's awesome. We're really excited about that. Before we get into the sports psychology world and talk about things like confidence, motivation, the psychology of coaching too, which is a very important topic as well for every coach that is listening to this podcast, I want to ask you, for those that don't know you, who is Lindsay Ross Stewart and how did you get into the field of sports psychology?
I think that's a big question. Who is Lindsay Ross Stewart? I think you gave a pretty good bio, of my background. So I am a university professor and I have worked in applied sports psychology consulting for quite a few years now, both in the university setting, so working in Division I athletics in the United States, and also working with youth as young as 12 all the way up to professional athletes. So that's certainly maybe who I am on a professional level, but I think we're all more complicated than what it looks like we are on paper. Just like athletes are more than just athletes in their sporting arena, they're human beings who are complicated and have other backgrounds. I would say the same for myself. Other things maybe that you would see on paper. I'm a mom, I think that's important in the work that I do. And also I'm Canadian. And so I have spent my career working partly in the United States and now partly in Canada. And sort of being able to see how sports work in different countries, I think has been really valuable and is part of sort of my perspective and part of who I am and what I bring both to my students and my clients as well.
Mm-hmm. That's awesome. Very important too, right? Being able to manage your mom duties with the work that you do.
Yeah, it absolutely is. And I think it also is important to recognize that being a mom sometimes is something that it can be easy to see as, oh, it's a thing you have to juggle with being a professional or working in applied sports psychology. But actually, I think it also brings a lot of skills that have helped me be better in my career as well.
Have you been using some of the sports psychology techniques that you use with athletes for you as a mom?
Oh, I'm sure I do, related to communication and patience, and maybe as being a parent of kids who are in high performance activities, or performance activities, making sure that I am supporting them as people who happen to be in these things, opposed to fitting into some of the stereotypes or risking becoming one of the sport parents that are not helpful for kids. So it certainly helped me there.
Yeah, I think that can be a good starting point. The work that we as sports psychology consultants with parents, right? Super important at that age to give kids a good environment to grow, to have success as persons before they have success as athletes. But what would be some advice that you will have for parents that are going through that journey of, okay, I wanna try to find the best approach to help my kids succeed?
I think it's really important first to recognize that parents, for the most part, parents really want the best for their kids. And so I think we certainly see examples in sports psychology, or anybody who's ever been to a youth sporting event. You see examples of parents who take it too far who we sort of use as these examples of like they're screaming at their kids or they're overcoaching their kids. And I think we see those things, but I think it's really important to remember, even in those moments, these are parents who love their kids and are trying to support their kids the best they can. And so we want to always remember that as coaches and people and support staff around youth sport, that the parents mean well. But I think sometimes as parents, we want so much for our kids to have success and we want all the things for our kids that we try and give them all the things. And that's really not our job in sport. And so I would say one of the most important things is for a parent to remember you're not the coach and to let the coach and stay in the role of a parent. And the role of a parent isn't actually to tell your child what they should have done, what they could have done, what you would have done in that situation. Your role as the parent is to be a sounding board for your child who wants to tell you about their sporting experience. So if they want to tell you how great their game was, it's not your job to say, yeah, it was great, but here's something else you should do. That's not your job as the parent. Your job really is to be there to hear your child and support what they need. And so it can be hard as a parent because if you have feedback that you think will help your child be successful, it's hard to hold that in, right? Because you want to share it. But I would say to parents, keep it to yourself, right? Like your child will ask you if they want your feedback on their sport experience. And so you can just be a parent, and it can also lighten the load off yourself as a sport parent to just be able to watch and enjoy your child. The second thing I would say is your child's playing ability is not a reflection of you. Often I think I hear parents talk about almost like they're embarrassed if their child has a bad game, or if their child plays well, they feel better almost about themselves as a parent. And those two things are not correlated, right? Children's sport performance ability in a game is not correlated with your quality as a parent. What is correlated is if you're out there yelling at your kid for not having a good game, or you're talking to other parents about being embarrassed because your child didn't perform well, your child feels those things. And so remembering that what happens on the ice, on the court, on the field, those are not a reflection of who you are as a parent is really important to allow you to just enjoy the experience. And then maybe finally in third, I would say treat sports as an activity, not a job. Right? This is not going to lead to a professional job for most athletes. And even if it is going to, treating it like an activity that is fun is more likely to help them get there than treating it like a job where you make it a chore or make it actually a punishment that they have to go do sport because you've taken the fun out of it because it became so serious. So try to stay light and treat it like an activity and not a job.
Right. I mean, I think one of the things that we'll try to do to some extent, parents included, when someone that we love is struggling, unconsciously, something that comes to our mind is, okay, if I were you in this situation, I will do this, right? But that's so hard to assess because the fact that you think about what you would do in that situation, it's based on, your own bias, your own perceptions, your own beliefs. So you might think that works, but I think that's a really good point, right? Like providing that place for the young athletes where they are comfortable just playing. I mean, something that we keep coming back in our conversation with athletes is remember to have fun. Like don't forget that. Remember why you started playing in the first place, and that's something that sometimes is really hard for athletes to focus on, especially the more professionalized that the sport gets. So yeah, tremendously important, the impact that parents have at those ages.
Well, and all of those things, like this idea of staying focused on the fun, it's a lot easier for an athlete to focus on the fun if the organization, if the coaches and their parents are doing the same thing. And I think it's important to note that we're not saying focus on the fun, therefore winning doesn't matter. I think we all know that winning, kids want to win too. Like people want to be successful. They want that, but it's not the only thing that matters. And even at the professional levels, we try not to focus on the winning as the only thing, with the recognition that focusing on other things can actually get us to more wins. And so I just say that because I think there sometimes can be pushback on the idea of fun as if fun and winning are opposites, but they actually belong in the same area together, whether it's youth sport or professional sport. And so it's important for parents and coaches to remember that. And the other thing you said that I think is really important is this idea of how to be a good supporter, that we do often think we're supporting when we say, oh, I totally get what you're going through. It's like this time I went through. And then we make it all about ourselves, right? Or it could be a parent who's saying, oh, yeah, I remember when I played. Or it can be a coach who's making it about some other time they coached, or just in any day relationships, friendships, relationships, the desire to support by connecting, by saying, hey, I went through this too. it's a good intention and sometimes it can be useful, but a lot of times people just want someone to hear them, to hear their experience, not say, oh, I was there too, but to just hear the experience and recognize that that experience is hard or great or whatever it happened to be. And so it can be really powerful as a coach, as a parent, as a human being to try really hard to listen without ever saying, oh, that reminds me of this time when or to your point, here's what you should do, instead to just listen. And one thing you can do in those situations is ask a person, what can I do for you? Do you want me to be here to just listen to you? Or do you want advice? Like, what can I do for you? And people will tell you if you ask them. And that can be really helpful in making sure you're having respectful communication.
I think that's an awesome advice. That question right there, right? What do you need from me today? A lot of athletes, especially those young athletes, when I've been talking to them, one of the things that keeps coming back is, that ride that they have when they have to go back home from the field, and they're talking to their parents. That's something that I've encountered multiple times where, they're like, yeah, I don't know. I'm kind of scared sometimes of that drive back, especially if I didn't play at my best today. What would be some advice, Lindsay, that you could give to those parents for those moments?
In the car ride, let your child dictate the conversation. So after a game, great job, or how do you feel? How do you feel about how it went? And then your child will tell you. And if they say, it went fine, I don't really want to talk about it, they have the right not to talk about it, even if that's eating you up as a parent. I've certainly had times where I've wanted to say all these things and you want to give more, but you have to realize if they don't want to talk about it, nothing you say is going to be heard with the intention of good, right? It is going to be heard from a child who is still processing the game that they were in, still trying to figure out what happened, and isn't ready to hear those things or shouldn't have to hear those things from you. And so I think the advice is let your child dictate the conversation in the car, and remember, when they're ready, they'll talk to you if it's something they want to talk to you about. And if they don't, they have the right not to talk to you about their sport experience in that moment. And if it is something where you think maybe you're worried about how it went and you're worried that they're upset about it, give them the car ride to calm down, give them the car ride to process that, and maybe talk about it when you get home, again, from a place of supporting them, not telling them how they could have done it different.
Great advice. I want to talk, Lindsay, a little bit more about how can we get better at communicating in general, right? Let's say that coach-to-player relationship where the coach is trying to create that environment for the athlete to succeed, but at the same time, trying to listen to what the athlete has to say about whatever they're going through in that moment. What would be some general advice that we can give coaches on how to handle those conversations?
Anytime it comes to communication, I think when people hear that term, they automatically think about the speaker, right? What a person is saying. But it's important to remember that communication is a two-way process. If there's two people involved, however many people are involved, each of those people are having their own experience. So you have the speaker who is saying something, making the choice to say it and deciding how to say it. What's their tone? What's their body language? Where are they saying it, right? Is it in front of a whole team or is it one-on-one? Is it right after practice or is it, giving people a little bit of time later? That's the speaker's decisions. But then you also have the person who's receiving that message, and they're making decisions about how they perceive that message, the way they listen to it, what are they perceiving about the person who's giving them that information, right? And so both of those things are really important in the communication process, but I think we only focus on the speaker a lot of the time. So first, I would say, remember, you have to think about how your athlete is going to perceive what you're saying because they are going to perceive it based on their reality. So sometimes what will happen is maybe a coach says to an athlete, something really like that they consider is not really that big of a deal. It's just simply like you've got to move more to the left. That's it. And then they look at the athlete and the athlete's clearly frustrated. And it's like, all I said was move to the left. Why are they frustrated? But what the athlete actually heard was, you have to move to the left. And then they almost fill in blanks of because you're not in the right spot, right? Or the athlete is interpreting it in a way that makes them feel badly because the athlete doesn't know if they trust the coach or perceives the coach to be upset with them. Or maybe the athlete's upset themselves, right? And they're projecting that onto their coach. And so I think there's all sorts of things that are at play when it comes to communication. So it's really important to recognize both those sides and therefore be very deliberate about tone and body language and where things are said. Giving athletes criticism, especially youth athletes, criticism in front of teammates is going to embarrass them. And when people feel embarrassed, they are way less likely to learn. In fact, they don't learn, right? Because they're in their embarrassment. And so if you want to give instructional feedback, if someone has done something that you need to discuss, find a way to do that one-on-one where it comes from a place of support. It's much more likely to be heard by the athlete and therefore to lead to change. And to that point, I would say the communication process works a lot smoother. Both people tend to perceive things the best way possible if they have a really strong relationship. So if athletes believe their coaches care about them as people and they care about them and their development, they're more likely to perceive it in a positive tone. They're more likely to perceive the feedback as, hey, this is to help me. So a lot of what a coach can do to build that communication process is actually about building a culture of trust and a culture of community in their team so that the athletes are looking for ways to interpret their coaches in a positive way instead of looking for ways to interpret their coaches in a negative way.
Yeah, I think sometimes the timing on when to have those conversations, right? Like the example that you gave about, when to provide feedback. We think sometimes when we're trying to give advice, especially coaches, right, to athletes, obviously in their minds is they have the best intention, right? But sometimes we forget to go through that assessment process of, okay, what is my athlete right now from a mental or a receiving standpoint right now. So obviously the more conversation that you have with yourself about how to go into those moments, that's going to dictate how the athlete responds to that feedback. Because also what you don't want to do is fall into the trap of giving the athlete not too much feedback, but the way. I think it's the way, not the amount of information. I think is the way that you give feedback. It might be a point where, the athlete comes in into the field, he sees you and he doesn't even look at you. Or every time that you talk, he doesn't even look at you. It's very interesting because when you watch a practice session and you see how athletes interact with the coaches, you can see the type of relationship that they have with each other, right? Like if an athlete is looking away, maybe when the coach is talking to them, thinking, I mean, you cannot detect what they're thinking, but you imagine that they're saying, okay, I don't want to listen to you right now. Or maybe some other stronger things, right? About them in those moments. So yeah, especially important that moment.
And I think I was just going to say, I think too, if you to your examples of watching what's happening on the field, a lot of times it's both where and how that feedback is being given, but also how well our coach is listening when their athletes give feedback. Because if as a coach you get defensive when your athletes give you feedback, then you're modeling that for your athletes, right? But if you ask your athletes for feedback and then you respect the feedback you're given, even if you don't agree, even if it hurts to hear, then you're modeling that for your athletes as well. And the other thing I would say is there's actually quite a bit of research like that's kind of in this area in sports like that's come out, but there's a lot of stuff looking at what coaches do in practice and how that transitions to a game as far as giving their athletes room to be creative. And what we can see is that sometimes coaches are so over communicative, over instructional in practice. They're telling them every little play they should do. Every time, if it's soccer, every time the ball goes, it's not the exact right pass. It's not exactly what they want. They're blowing the whistle and they're telling them what they should do. Everything is decided. But in a game, soccer's a fluid game. Players have to be able to make their own decisions out there. And then coaches get frustrated when their players can't make the decisions. And they're constantly looking to the sideline to see what the coach wants them to do because they've lost their ability to be autonomous, to make their own choices out on the field because practice is so controlling. And so some of the new stuff coming out is showing that the more coaches can allow players to be creative in practice, to take risks, play through a mistake. See, okay, so you made a bad pass. How can we play through that to make sure that in a game when a bad pass happens, because it will, we know what to do? Developing your practice plans like that can actually help players have higher confidence, believe their coach trusts them to figure things out, and then in a game be more likely to be creative and make their own decisions opposed to constantly looking at the bench for advice. And so it's not just about how you give the communication, but what you choose to communicate and how much of that you're choosing to communicate as well, that I think is really important.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think especially coaches that are maybe starting out, some of the things that they tend to focus a lot is in the content, right? In the content of the session or the things that they want to get. But adding those variables can be a great exercise, not only for the athletes, but for the coaches as well, right? Not only thinking, okay, what do I want to accomplish with this drill from a tactical, technical standpoint, but also from a psychological standpoint for the athlete. Because to your point, if maybe you control the environment too much, right? Let's say a passing drill. During the game, you have so many stimulus that you have to think about before making that decision that you cannot stop it. You cannot blow the whistle and say, no, you pass it to the left instead of to the right, or you try to make this decision. So giving those athletes more control about the decision making can improve then when they get into the field.
And when you make those decisions to let them keep playing, or when you, as a coach, when they go to stop, you go, no, keep going, right? Like, keep going in this drill. You're also showing your players you trust them. And by showing them that you trust them, it increases their trust in themselves often, especially, developmentally at appropriate stages. And so that's also really valuable to help them be confident in their game decision-making so that they're not hesitating in a game and that they're trusting the instincts they have out there. I'm also a big believer, when it comes, if we're talking about practices and how we design our practices, I'm a big believer in encouraging risk in practice. So, practicing dirty, practicing with mistakes. And maybe you have a player who does something, they're just trying it. They've never really done it before, and they try it and they fail epically. Instead of being mad they failed, reward the fact that they tried, because you do want that to be a skill they eventually have. And so how do you reward them for trying that skill and continue to try that skill in practice where it's a safe place, where it's not impacting things? And then how do you help them figure out when it's time to actually implement that in a game, or how to develop that? And so I think we're often too careful to try and make sure practice is perfect. But the best way to make practice where there's no mistakes is for people to do things they already know how to do, which does not lead to growth, right? And it does not lead to success. So it might look like a really clean practice, but nothing of learning has happened. And the point is to help players learn and develop and grow, and rewarding people for taking risk, for challenging themselves, for pushing themselves to grow can lead to huge gains and success down the road.
I think that's a huge point. I mean, that's one of the things that I was more interested in learning about when I first started with sports psychology. When I got my hands on the book Mindset by Carol Dweck, just started learning the difference between fixed and growth mindset. And when she talks about growth mindset being this ability to think of mistakes as opportunities to grow, I mean, it really hit me, because when I was growing up and I started playing this sport, right? When I started playing soccer, the higher that you get, the more that mistakes get penalized, right? The more that professional you get. And we tend to forget that as players, right? Like those mistakes that you made, they're part of the journey, they're part of that growth. So coaches are an unbelievable opportunity right there to encourage that, right? To train that growth mindset during the practice session. Every time that the athlete makes a mistake. Now, obviously, you have to go through the whole assessment process of why that mistake happened. But if it's in a situation where you were providing that creativity, where you were providing that decision making, then it's something that the athlete will be, okay, I'm good with it. Let's get one more. And you see it. You see it with players. You have those players that maybe, let's say it's a shooting drill. They come in, they make a mistake, they keep their head down, and then they go back into the line. But then you have some other players that they make a mistake, or things don't go the way that they want during that specific drill, and they are asking for one more rep in that moment, right? Like that's when you realize, okay, this player has that ability to come back from those mistakes.
And they're in an environment that supports them doing that. And so if you're in an environment that supports you going one more time to try and figure it out, you're going to. If you're in an environment where if you go again and make another mistake, you're going to get yelled at, then you're not going to ask. And I think you can really see that often if you're around a team enough. You can start to see where players feel psychological safety, and that psychological safety is about them as people, but also them as players, on the field, ice, court, wherever that happens to be. And so I do think that's really important. And the other thing you said too, I think to touch on, is this idea, this growth mindset from Carol Dweck, the book, it's behind me somewhere. But I think we really do talk a lot about in sports psychology. And I think it lends to the idea of mental flexibility. I think there was a time, or maybe it's still out there a little bit, where people are talking about mental toughness. But the problem with talking about mental toughness is it implies that a person either is tough or not, right? That somehow we're all born innately to handle the pressures of sport, or we're born not to handle the pressures of sport. But sport is hard. Youth sport has become very intense, right? Professional sport, there's a lot of consequences to performance. And so it is a lot, and it's not about I'm just tough and I don't pay attention and nothing bothers me and I just have it. It's about skills and about the mental flexibility to be able to adjust when things don't go well, to be able to adapt to different situations. And so the athlete in your example who can go, hey, I want to go again, that mental flexibility to recognize, oh, I'm not bad because I missed once. I can go again, right? The flexibility to see past that. And so I think often for coaches to be pushing mental flexibility with their athletes is really powerful. And I think all of these are true for coaches as well. We want coaches who take risks, who have mental flexibility themselves about what their role is. And for that to be possible, you need an organization that supports that, right? Because the coach can only do what the organization will allow them to do, particularly in higher level sports, or they'll be gone. And so for coaches to be able to coach in a way that fosters mental flexibility and fosters psychological safety, they need an organization that's supporting that as well.
From that psychological flexibility, Lindsay, that coaches should be try to encourage within the team, we've also seen the difference between providing an environment that is focused on the outcome, which obviously winning it's important, right? Yeah. But then when you start to see these patterns across different sports, football, basketball, soccer, baseball, you've seen that there are some coaches that they focus on the process a lot, while there are some others that they focus on the outcomes, and that dictates the type of feedback that they give their athletes, the things that are, awarded between players and the things that are not. Could you touch a little bit more on those differences between providing a space for athletes to focus on the process versus the outcome?
Absolutely. And to your point, we all know the outcome matters, right? You want to have the most successful season in a lot of ways. So certainly the pro level, that's wins. College level, that tends to be wins. Jobs where coaches' jobs are on the line by wins, we'd be crazy not to acknowledge that that's true. And at the youth level, it's players want to win, but it really is about development. That's supposed to be the measure. And so when we talk about the outcome, okay, let's assume the outcome is the most wins possible. Then what is the process to get there? And, in sports psych, we say all the time, trust the process. It's probably an oversaid saying because it's true. And we say that because athletes and coaches who can really focus on, hey, where am I now? Right. So right now in this situation, here's the skills I have. Here's the knowledge I have. How do I grow to the next step? People who can do that will get to the end result faster. I often think of it like steps. So if you're a coach, if you think about like there's 25 steps from, day one with your team to the end result. If you're on step 1 and all you're thinking about is step 25, and you take a leap, you're going to fall and slide down on your face, right? On those stairs. Like, if you can't just jump from step 1 to step 25, you have to get to step 2. And then once you're on step 2, you focus on how do you get to step 3. That is the way to get to the 25th step on the staircase. Sports are the same. Here's where we are. We have to acknowledge where we are and then focus on how do we get to the next step and keep doing that. And so when we say trust the process, that's really what we're saying. We're not saying don't care about the outcome. We're not saying the outcome doesn't matter, but we're saying, hey, you want to get the outcome you want? The fastest way there, the most effective way there is actually to stay focused in on the moment and develop for the next step and the next step and the next step. And doing this, it's more fun for coaches because you'll get to see the growth. Oh, we're on step 2. Oh, we're on step 3. And it's more fun for the athletes. It increases confidence every step of the way as your gains are happening. Like, look, we made it to the step 3, right? We've achieved this next level. If you think about gaming, like we've leveled up. No one plays a game and goes from level 1 to 100. Well, I don't know, maybe experts do, but for the most part, you don't go level 1 to 100. You have to level up. So you think about helping your athletes level up those steps can have huge success, both for them psychologically and an outcome when you think about wins and losses.
I think that developing that perspective, right? Having that perspective of, okay, what happened yesterday, it won't dictate what is going to happen today, because sometimes we get so caught up into the win-loss environment that everything that a loss comes in is like, okay, all the work that we've done so far, it doesn't count. And coaches, I think, have a great opportunity to use. Sometimes it doesn't even need to be like a 20-minute speech, right? But having that reminder of, okay, let's not forget how come we've come to your point, right? And maybe we're in level 23 right now, and the fact that we didn't make it to 24 doesn't mean that we haven't already passed 22 levels, right? And yeah, I think that's huge.
And you need an organization, again, that supports that. If you think about professionally, we're very quick to fire coaches. And so you can have a coach, maybe they are following that process, and now they're on step 11, but the administration is like, no, I wanted you on step 24 by now, you're out. So you have to have everyone understand that. I think our sport culture has gotten too quick to fire people. We've had some really high-level professional coaches come out and talk about that. How am I supposed to develop a culture if I can't be here long enough to develop a culture?
Right.
And so I do think at the professional level, we really have to think about that, about what we're doing. We have some great examples of teams that didn't start strong, but because their coaches had sort of earned credit from past wins in past seasons, they were able to continue on, and then they turned things around. The Kansas City Chiefs being an example of that last year, winning the Super Bowl. Everyone was worried at the beginning, but giving them a chance. There's so many examples of that if we can stay true to the process and not decide on a team's success based on wins and losses in that one moment alone, that we can start to see the wins really progress. And again, at the youth level, for coaches who are watching this, or parents who are watching this at the youth level, if the goal is to have your child be the best athlete they can be, wins at 12 years old don't matter, right? Having them figure out how to love the sport and continue to grow, physical activity development, to grow their physical skills, to grow their understanding of the game, to grow their love of the game, that does matter as far as long-term sport development, their chances of staying in the sport and wanting to continue. And so to keep sight that is actually the goal can be really important. And too often we have parents who are putting a lot of pressure on coaches of 10-year-olds, 11-year-olds to win. And so it's important to understand that how you treat and understand winning as the outcome in the professional levels is not the same as what should be happening with youth.
And it's so interesting to see that those young athletes, if they interpret those mistakes as punishment, or those losses as, okay, I'm not worthy in that, I'm really bad, I shouldn't be here, that internalization then plays a role the higher that they get, right? Because if they can't have a positive mindset towards making those mistakes, they're going to be having mistakes during their whole career. And, those messages that they might receive, maybe from parents, from coaches, from teammates too, if they're not able to balance that well, now every time that I have to level up, before you can dominate a level, you have to, you are new, right? You are new, you have to adapt to different situations, you're going to make mistakes. And the more that in love that you fall in that process, the easier that it's going to be for you. Sometimes we have players, right, that they are 18, 17 years old that we see across all the sports. Once they get to the professional level, they won't be, they are not successful that first year. And that's okay. But if again, the opponent has, and the coaches has such a good opportunity when those players are young, because if they're able to provide that environment for them where they can make mistakes, they can be creative, and they can provide that support at the same time, then when they get to those levels, they just need to come back to the things that they already know. They don't need to be training that. They don't need to be figuring anything out, anything new. And that's going to put them at an advantage to some other players that maybe didn't have that environment.
Well, and the process is the process, right? So whether you're playing 12-year-old baseball or college baseball or pro baseball, baseball is baseball. And obviously the skill goes up and all that's true. But the process is the same of working to develop your skills. And so if we can help athletes develop a pride in the process, a pride in their own personal gains, in their own growth, then that can happen when they're a freshman in college or when they're in their first year in the pros. But if everything is about, oh, you're a starter when you're 13, you're a starter when you're 17, you're the best on your team. And then I see this so often. In my career, I spent years teaching a class on mental performance to freshman college students, worked with a lot of freshman college students. And what you see is athletes who had their whole time, for a lot of athletes, their worth is based on the fact that they were a starter and the best. And then they come to university and they're not a starter and they're certainly not the best. And now they don't know if they're good enough at all. And so it's not just, oh, it's kind of disappointing not to start, or it's kind of disappointing not to play at all. It's, am I even worthy of being here? Who am I if I'm not the best? And their entire identity is challenged because it's not about the process for them. It's about, I'm good at this because I'm the star. So when we do that to kids, it has impact when they get to university. To your point, they're going to go, if you go to your, even you make the pros, you're in your first year of the pros, maybe it's not so great, right? You're adapting to a whole new system. But if you know how, through understanding how to work the process, you can adapt a lot faster, and it doesn't have such a negative impact on one's self-worth and efficacy, doesn't decrease motivation, doesn't increase anxiety and sort of one's questioning of who they are, like it does if we only focus on, hey, your value is in how many minutes you get. Your value is in how good you are based on your playing time. Those things become pretty problematic because those things aren't in our control, and they change as you go up in level.
Mm-hmm. I mean, it's about having that perspective on the goals too that you have for that day, for that week, for that season, for that year. To your point with that freshman example, right? If you come in thinking that you're gonna play every game, and then after the first week you realize that you're only gonna come in for 5 or 10 minutes, or you're gonna have a secondary role, but you are still assessing your worth, you're still assessing how much you are of value for that team based on the timing that you have on the field. That year is gonna be really, really hard for you. While in that moment you're able to receive your goals. I think, okay, what do I need to focus on today that is gonna help me get that starting spot or get more minutes on the field or have better opportunities maybe next year. And it's obviously it's easier said than done. But that's why it's so important, again, how the athlete interprets that situation. And something, Lindsay, that
And
you
I,
touched on. Yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I don't think either is easy. I don't think the message is, if you trust the process, you're going to just love that you don't play, right?
Mm-hmm.
But it is that you can accept that you're not playing and that you still have a role to develop, right? And being able to accept that role, have clear understanding of that, and then recognizing you can still develop and you can still have a good attitude. Those things go a long way for personal development as a player, so that you're ready to go for the next year. And they go a long way as far as coaches' perception of a player, to be able to give them more opportunity. So both are difficult, but being able to understand the process and focus in there still gives you opportunities to see your own accomplishments, and leads to an athlete being more likely to stay on the team versus an athlete who's only about playing time or about wins or those types of outcomes, who we often see transfer to lower levels because all of a sudden they realize, hey, I'd rather win than push myself. And people can transfer for all sorts of reasons, right? That's not a judgment, or we see drop out because it has such an impact on them, or just really sort of emotionally struggle through the experience, like we've said.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it's so interesting to see how a player, especially at that age, can have a particular moment with a coach, a teammate, or just a situation where they encounter either those mistakes and that failure, and based on what happened, they decide to stay out of the sport. 2 years ago, I was actually having a conversation with someone that I randomly met at the gym. I was working out, and I started talking to this guy. We finished the workout together. But we started talking, and he actually stopped playing soccer when he was 13 years old. 13, right? Obviously I played soccer my whole life, and it's something that I love. So we started talking about different teams, and the conversation went to a point where I asked him, hey, so why did you stop playing? Like at 13, and he was just like, well, to be honest with you, I mean, I had a really bad experience with a coach. It was someone that I didn't trust. He made me feel ashamed all the time, and I just said, this is not for me. And, when you look at those professional athletes that are not in the, 0.1%, like, the Michael Jordans,
Yeah.
the Kobe Bryants, a lot of those athletes, they have to go through a whole process before they get to the professional level, and before they're able to succeed. I mean, there is this player, he had a debut in the Premier League when he was 27 years old. And then he had a great, successful career. So it definitely takes time to have success in this world. But that experience that you have when you're young, it can dictate the next decision that you make, and maybe that then the decision is, okay, I'm done. I'm done with all this.
And I think that is so true. And I think one thing that I really hope coaches of youth, because a lot of youth coaches are parents, people who really want to give back. I mean, they're volunteering for their community. It's pretty incredible. We need youth coaches for sport to thrive. And one thing for those coaches to really remember is one, the research is pretty consistent that when you ask young athletes, would they rather be on a winning team and never play, or on a team that doesn't win, but they all get to play, but they get to play, they'll pick they get to play, right? They want to develop. That is part of the experience for really young athletes. And obviously, once you do tryout teams and you're in developmental leagues, that's a little bit different. And the expectations are different, but recognizing the developmental level you're at. And the other thing I would say is there are so many examples of professional athletes, high school athletes, college athletes, who will talk about a coach who had impact for them. And they will say about how this coach cared about them and how this coach really supported them and how this coach believed in them. Now, maybe this has happened, but never have I ever heard a quote in which a player said, like, I had this really great coach. They taught me the X's and O's, but they didn't really like me as a person, right? Or they didn't value me as a person, but they did know good strategy. The things that we care about in our youth coaches, the things that have impact, are coaches who treat us with respect and value us and care about us and make it fun. And in your example, the opposite of that happens. If you have coaches who don't do those things, we see dropout. And we see that all the time, that people drop out of sport because of a bad experience in leadership. And so I think as a youth coach to really remember that it's about the experience that you're developing for these players. It is about treating them in a way that makes sport fun and encouraging, opposed to screaming at them when things don't go right, because that's not about the players. That's about a coach's ego. And that's not where you want to coach from. That those things are really important when it comes to how can we develop youth to give them opportunities to continue to go. We can't predict who's going to go pro from 5, even though we all think we can, It's how do you continue to give people a love of sport so that they can go through puberty, have the opportunities to develop, find what they love, and then continue to develop so that they can go on if that's what ends up happening, or they can at least develop a lifelong learning and love of physical activity and sport.
I mean, I think athletes remember those coaches that spend those 5-10 minutes after a practice session, talking to them, getting to know them. I think we've been mentioning before, right, the importance of the athlete needs to know that the coaches care about them besides how much they play, because then it can be so inconsistent. I mean, once you get to those levels, you're going to have a good game, you're going to have a bad game, but you need someone behind you that trusts you, right? And maybe, the decision for that weekend or for that moment is that you don't play, but that doesn't mean that the coach can have a conversation with that player. And just, not making it act like nothing happened, but say, hey, okay, the things have changed based on your previous performance, but so, you're still important in this team, we still trust you. Let's have a conversation about this. I wanna hear your thoughts into this. You're still gonna make that decision as a coach, right? But at least you provide the athlete with that moment to tell you how he's feeling in that moment, and you have it in the court for the next game.
Yeah, I'm a big believer in Bill Beswick, who's a sports psych professional. I'm a big believer in his sort of philosophy of warmth plus demanding. And I think it is so true that if you can show warmth to your players, show care, that foundation allows you to be more demanding. It allows you to ask more. It allows you to push because the players trust you and they know you're in it for them. And so they will rise with you. And so you can go up those stairs faster. The warmth isn't, hey, we just want to be nice. It's not just about that. It's about, this is actually the plan to be the most successful coach. This is the plan to get the most out of your athletes. And so again, just like fun is not the opposite of winning, like caring about your athletes is not the opposite of success. It is part of the plan for success that makes the experience better for everybody involved and leads to where you want to go faster. It just takes rethinking maybe what a lot of people had as a coach when they were younger, 20, 30 years ago, because things have changed, right? And I will say too, I played a lot of sports at various levels, very high levels, some of them, but the person with the biggest impact on me was my gym teacher who loved sport when I was in elementary school. I know I wouldn't have been in sport if it weren't for my elementary school gym teacher who had, marathon training at lunches and early morning games and just gave all these opportunities to be involved through physical activity to kids at every level and just loved it. And it wasn't about winning and losing. It was about being out there and playing these fun games and having that experience. And that was the foundation of loving sport that led me then to a career in sport. And so I think it's important to always remember, like, what's the purpose of why we're out here? Why are you coaching? Why do you value this? And staying true to like caring about the people that you're coaching.
Powerful example, Lindsay, the one that you have with your gym coach, because again, I mean, those early experiences, they're gonna dictate how you see the world once you grow up. So taking taking some time to reflect on the type of conversation that we have with athletes, the things that we want from them, but also spending time thinking about what is truly important for them. Again, athletes are gonna care once they know, are gonna care about what you have to say once they know how much you care about them. So taking advantage of every opportunity to do that can have a huge impact into the player's life and the human's life at the end of the day. Something that I wanted to touch on, Lindsay, which I thought it was very interesting, right, is those moments where, the coach might be making the conversation about them instead of the athlete, and touch a little bit on the transference concept and how sometimes we, based on an experience that we had in the past, then we have the same feelings, we have similar feelings, and then we basically act in the same way that someone else acted on ourselves in those moments, and how we translate all those feelings into the player. But again, it's not that necessarily is not about the player, but it's about the coach in that moment.
Yeah, there's this fascinating thing I think that happens in human beings, which is often we have experiences that we can recognize were not good, and then we continue to perpetuate those not good experiences. And so this is not about coaching, but it's an example. Often there will be situations, as sport has progressed, things like hazing have, are no longer appropriate, nor that they ever should have been happening, right? But the rules about hazing have become more strict. Even things as simple as, freshmen carry the bags, those things aren't necessarily happening now. And I've certainly many, many times now worked with teams where maybe the seniors, when they were freshmen, they had to carry the bags, let's say. And now they're seniors and the freshmen don't have to. And they hated it when they were freshmen. They felt like it pulled them away from the team. They felt like it was unfair. They felt like it diminished them, and they're already trying to feel like they're part of the team. And now they don't even get to go in the locker room at the same time as the team. They didn't like it. But now that they're seniors, they feel like it's very unfair that their current freshmen don't have to do it, right? I hated it and had to do it. So you should have to do this thing you hated. But the reality is we should be learning more. You know more, you do better, right? And so you hated this. Why would you want someone else to have to go through that? And I think sometimes that happens with coaching. People can recognize, I hated when my coach screamed at me. I hated when my coach did this, or it wasn't effective when my coach just yelled out on the field, be stronger, be mentally tough out there, right? That did nothing for me. But now I'm a coach and it was what was modeled to me. And I'm doing the same thing because that's just all I know, or because, hey, yeah, I hated it, but look, I made it here to a coach. And so it must have worked. And so part of being a really effective coach or organizer or anyone involved in sport is recognizing how to separate out, just because I did it or it happened to me, I should be doing that to somebody else. That's not how we should be making decisions. Learn and grow so that you aren't just transferring your own experiences that weren't positive onto other people.
You made me think about this quote, Lindsay, from Chris Williamson, where he talks in his podcast, Modern Wisdom, on how the difference between a superhero and a villain is how they interpreted what happened to them early on. The villain gets defeated by the world. Someone does something really bad for them and says, okay, based on all the pain that I've suffered during this time, I'm going to make sure that everyone feels the same. While the superhero goes through the same exact experience, and he says, okay, this is what happened to me. I went through this difficult situation. I'm going to make sure that this doesn't happen again because I know better. And again, it can be something that we can remind ourselves. It's true. I mean, we don't know what coaches, players, people went through. But at the end of the day, we all have we can make that decision, right? We can make that decision of, okay, this is something that happened to me. Now I know better, and now I get the opportunity that I can change I can change that, right? I can change the system, I can change the culture, I can change what is expected now. So yeah, I think that's a powerful idea.
I love that analogy. And I often think of it as what has happened for a coach, or when I work with athletes or with anyone, it's like, it can be a reason, but it's not an excuse. So you can understand that maybe, the way that you were coached, or an injury for an athlete or anything, it's a reason for why you feel the way you feel. It's a reason for why you do what you do, but it's not an excuse, meaning you don't get to say, well, that's just how it is, right? You still have a responsibility to make change where change is required, or where change will lead to growth. So recognizing, hey, this is why is important. That's the reason. Let's not sit in that as an excuse. Let's keep working forward to make sure you're doing the best for yourself and the people that you're touching in your lives, right? Because you have impact. All of us have so much impact with how we interact with all the people that are around us. And so for a coach, that's with athletes and your staff and all people above you in an organization. But for athletes, teammates, your coach, all those. So recognizing what's going on and then being able to work through that. With knowledge comes that power, right? To be able to use it. Knowledge is only powerful if you make a decision to use it to grow. And so to make sure you're doing that.
Yeah, I mean, there is definitely a huge difference between having access to the knowledge and using it. And again, how much of that decision that you're making in that moment is coming from, that more logical perspective on something that you can do that is going to help the athlete, and how much of that decision is coming from that emotional part, maybe from something that you lived before, or maybe because of the athlete or the teammate you feel in that moment. Something, Lindsay, too, that I wanted to touch on that I think is especially important. We've talked on different topics about psychology of coaching, but a huge topic within coaching teams, how to find the best culture, is how to be a good leader. Right, have to have good leadership, have to be an example. I'm gonna put you in the spot here, but based on your experience, what do you think makes a good leader?
What do I think makes a good leader?
Yes.
I mean, I think that idea of warmth and demanding is really important. I think someone who's really clear about why they lead, and that answer isn't for themselves, right? So I think it's really important that a coach or an athlete leader, regardless of what it is leading for the support of their team. At any levels, I often say, whether it's sport or in academia or in politics or in a business, you want leaders who are leading from a place of responsibility, not a place of power. So you want leaders who are doing it because they believe that they can make a positive impact, that they have skills that they can offer, and because it needs to be done, and they know they can do that well, versus a person who's taking the opportunity to lead because they want the power of it. So they want the prestige. They want, how other people see them. They want the power in that role to have influence on others without understanding the responsibility behind it. So I definitely think good leaders are there for the responsibility of it. Coaches who are really there to try and support their athletes versus it looks good to be a coach. And then really truly caring about athletes as people when it comes to coach leadership, caring about the human being, not the skill set first.
I think that's an awesome description on how to be a good leader. Something too, Lindsay, that I'd like to get your thoughts on is that player leadership, right? Based on, I mean, every sport, it's a little bit different, but at least in team sports, you're going to have some captains that sometimes are dictated by the coach, sometimes are dictated by their teammates. What would be some good advice for athletes that are striving to get into that leadership role within the team? Maybe not necessarily be captains of the team, because I don't think you need a band that says that you're the captain to be a captain. But what are some of the things that they could be doing on the day-to-day, during the week, during the season?
I think first, what's really important if you want to be a leader is to be authentic to who you are. Sometimes what happens is people get named a captain or on a leadership committee or something like that, and they instantly try to become what their version of what a captain is in sport movies, or in a captain that they've had before that they've liked. But you can't lead if you're not authentic. And so to recognize what are my strengths as a player on this team. And for some athletes, that's going to be, hey, I'm really vocal and people listen to me. But for others, it's going to be how they play. And for others, it's going to be, hey, they're not great in front of the big team, but they're phenomenal one-on-one in supporting their teammates. So doing a little bit of self-reflection, I think self-reflection is incredibly important for all people, and particularly athletes and coaches and people in sport. Reflecting on, like, what are my strengths that I bring to this role as a leader? How do I lean into those? And then where are some areas that I recognize, like, these are not my strengths? Which of them are like, hey, it's not my strength, therefore I'm not super vocal, and that's okay. I'm going to leave it there, right? I'm just not going to take those roles. Someone else can do that, because we never have to lead alone. Or where are some of my areas that I need to grow, and what can I do to change that, right? What can I do to push myself out of the box a little bit? So it might be I'm not a vocal leader, but, once every 2 weeks, I'm going to take over from the other leader on the team and just do the little, like, 2-minute talk before practice or whatever to push yourself out of your comfort zone. But none of that can happen if you're not authentic to yourself and your own characteristics that you bring to the situation. So I think being authentic is really important for athletes, and I think coaches need to foster that as well. Sometimes a person gets named a captain, and then the second they're named a captain, all this work is done to tell them they have to be a completely different person, right? Well, the reason they were named a captain, the reason they became a leader is because of who they are. And so to recognize that, I also think leaders have to remember that they're the leader, not the boss. And so as a athlete leader, it's your job to lead, and part of that is supporting, but part of that is giving a voice of communication to other people on your team, not bossing other people on your team. And I think that's really important as well.
100%. I think too, if you're trying to be someone that you're not, people are going to notice that. That's going to decrease the credibility that you have as a person, as a leader in that moment, right? And it can even be diminishing for that captain in that moment, but also for the teammates and the team in general, right? Because you can have a teammate that was behaving with you in a certain way, and now that he got the role of a captain, he's been a little bit different. So it might be worth having, a conversation about that. But to your point, being authentic, just you can still be the same and be a great leader. You can still contribute to the team and bring the team together, having those minutes before a game or before a practice session to make sure that everyone is stay motivated and is ready for that session, but not get away too much from yourself, because people are gonna see that, especially once they've been with you for a couple of months, a couple of seasons, and that's when your credibility diminishes.
And I think from how a coach can support that, it's really important that a coach knows exactly what they want from their leadership group. So if you are going to name formal leaders, what do you want from them? What are the expectations of that role? And then figure out the people who fit it, and then making sure you explain that. I think a lot of times what happens is people are named captain, whether the coach does it or the team votes or however that happens, they're named to a leadership group, and no one really tells them what their role are. It's like, okay, yeah, you're the captain. Now figure it out on your own. Oh, I didn't like how you did that, right? And so communication, going back to this topic from the beginning of the podcast, communication is so important. We should never be afraid to ask people, what do you need from me? Or to tell people, like, here's what my expectations are of this role. Can you fit those? Opposed to, do you want to be captain? Right? And you can't express to someone else the expectations if you don't know them yourself. So in the same way that if you're in a conversation with someone, you want to say, like, what do you need? If you want to know if they want advice or if you just to listen. Or, we were talking earlier about how do you know, like, when you communicate with athletes, how do we do that effectively? I think we're always afraid to say, like, how do you want me to communicate with you if you need feedback from me? We can ask athletes, like, how do you want me to do this as a coach? And we can do the same thing and talk to our leaders about how do you, here's what I need from you to lead, and how do you feel like you can fit into that? So a lot of times having open dialogue from the coach level to the athletes can really help make sure everyone's on the same page up front, instead of everyone trying to guess what everybody else needs.
Yeah, I think sometimes you hit it right there. I mean, I've been in some teams where the captains found out that they're going to be captains, in that same moment that the team got noticed. And sometimes I've seen the disconnection between what the coach wanted and what the captain wanted. And now you as a player in every team sport, you're receiving mixed signals, you're receiving mixed messages. I mean, if they are not together, at the end of the day, that leadership role of that captain, it's the voice of the coach on the field too. So if it's not, to your point, being communicated well enough between the coach and the captain, then there is just too much information, too many mixed messages, and then you're as a player, you are thinking, okay, I may have to do this on my own, because someone is saying one thing, the other one is saying the other one, something different, and yeah, you just create that chaos for you as a player.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Something, Lindsay, that I wanted to touch on real quick before we finish. I know we have a few minutes late. Is how do we help coaches develop a winning mindset that has practical steps that they can follow?
It's a complicated question because it obviously depends on the developmental level. It depends on the type of coach, right? And what we mean by a winning mindset. I think in general, whether it's a volunteer youth coach or a professional coach, first a coach has to ask themselves, like, why am I coaching? Like, what do I believe I have to offer? Often considered a coaching philosophy. It's really interesting how few coaches have a coaching philosophy, or how many coaches have like written down a couple of things they believe why they coach, but they never go back to it. And so I would say first, if you want to have a winning mindset, you need to know what that is for you. What does winning mean to you? And that often can come from being really intentional about what is your philosophy about why you coach and how you coach, and then the steps within that. So people will say, like, I want a really great team culture. Well, what does a really great team culture look like? What do you want to see happen? If someone came to watch your practice, what would you want them to see? Right? What would you want that to look like? What would they be hearing? How would your athletes be communicating with each other and with you? Being really clear about what you want that to look like, it then helps you develop the steps to make that happen. And I think too often, because we are just doing it the way we were always told, or, hey, I just got to get to practice today without a lot of thought into it, we forget the why. And so I think to have a winning mindset, it's really important for a coach to recognize what their why is and what that really means to them, so that they can then develop those steps. And obviously it's more complicated than 30 seconds, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's easy for me to say this, but it does take time. But coaches who can do that, who are really intentional about their why, are really intentional about how they design their practices, are really intentional about how they make choices in their games, will find that their culture will start to work and their culture will start to solidify a lot faster. And so the front end is a lot of work, but then the back end, you see huge reward on that because everyone's clear and on the same page about what's happening there. And I think to me, that is a winning mindset. I also think staying focused in on the process is a winning mindset. I'm always really interested. I talked earlier about teams that maybe start struggling and they're given an opportunity to right the ship or to sort of start to win at the professional level. I'm always really interested in coaches who are consistent with the wins and the losses as a coach, right? Their moods don't change with wins and losses. Their philosophy doesn't change on wins and losses. Sometimes we have coaches who are all about trust the process until they lose 3 times, and now that's thrown out and all they're talking about is winning, right? And so having that philosophy allows us to be consistent and have a consistency of mindset of, like, I know this is the path I chose for an intentional reason. We're going to stay on the path because I know that's going to work. I think that is often a winning mindset, instead of sort of shifting with the wins and losses and letting them dictate the way you treat your athletes and the way you treat yourself.
I love the last point. I actually, one of the conversations that I'll never forget, it was from a coach that I had when I was 14 years old. And he always talked about being aware of the circle, the people that you're surrounded with. Because when things go well, everyone is going to be there for you, right? Everyone is going to be patting you on the back. Everyone is going to tell you how good you are, how awesome you did. But then once you're going through a difficult time, think about how many people reach out. Assess how many people are being worried about you in those moments, and how many, those that you consider friends, coaches, people that support you, stay with you during that difficult time. And it's so true, because at the end of the day, the athlete during that whole career is going to see, okay, who is with me for the short term, for their own benefit, and who is with me for the long term. But if the player can have that trust with the coach, they will run through walls for you once they're on the field, which is at the end what's gonna get you to winning games, right? So to your point, focusing on I love the fact that you mentioned winning mindset equals to having a process mindset, to facilitating these processes, facilitating these conversations, being intentional about the things that you want to accomplish, but also not forgetting that the player is gonna know if you're fake or not. The player is gonna know how you are, and the more that they get to know you, the more that you get to know the player, the easier that it's gonna get for them to get you what you want as a coach.
And players, even at a really young age, I mean, I have athletes who talk to me about their coaches, or I've seen it in coaches where we recognize really quickly when a coach is panicking, right? You can see really close when a coach is like, I'll try this because it's not working. I'll try this because it's not working. And they're just grasping at anything and everything because they're panicking that the success is not right there in front of them yet. And that makes athletes panic, and it makes athletes not trust their coaches. And you need buy-in. I mean, that's incredibly important that everyone's bought into the system. But athletes can't buy into a coach's system if it changes every Tuesday. You know, they have to understand what that system is. And so for a coach to be able to stay true to their system, they have to know what it is. They have to know why they've developed their sort of coaching culture system that way. And then they have to stay true to it and be authentic to it for the athletes to buy in. And to your point, it's really hard to do that if you're letting the judgment of when people are telling you how great you are, or when people are not talking to you and all of a sudden it's crickets because things aren't going well, you know, or you're getting pretty unkind press, you know, at the higher levels. It's hard to stay on your own path if you're so consumed by the outside voices. And so being really clear on what it is and then being intentional about passing that on regardless, it goes a long way for athletes to buy in, and that really can turn things around even if they're hard.
Mm-hmm. So true. Well, Lindsay, thank you so much for all the advice that you gave today for coaches. I think it turned out to be a great conversation on the psychology of coaching. We touched on leadership. We touched on how to have better communication with their athletes, how to be better at that coach-player relationship, how to create winning teams, how to create teams that are focused on the process and unable to get that outcome when they truly focus on that day-to-day, on the things that they need to do on those day-to-days. A question that I have for you that I always ask everyone that I bring to the podcast is, based on everything that you've lived so far, right? You're restoring to the sports psychology world, the things that you do in your day-to-day. If you could go back in time and talk to your past self, and you could give yourself 2 pieces of advice, what would those be?
I think the first would be that self-compassion goes a long way. And I think I said that earlier in this podcast, but I really believe that. I think we're often very hard on ourselves. And I can certainly think back to when I started in this field, you know, this expectation of being perfect, or this expectation that everything has to go a certain way. And so I think same thing for coaches, by the way, but for any of us, like self-compassion goes a long way. Treating yourself with the kindness you treat others can be really impactful in helping you enjoy your life. And then the second one may be connected, but there is time. I often think when we're younger, we feel like we have to do all the things every day. It's like, here's the things I want to have happen in my life. They should all happen today. And a recognition that there's time. You have time to hit different goals. You have time to do different things. And when you're willing to spread that out a little bit and be more intentional about what you pick, because you're not trying to do all the things, you enjoy it more and there's more satisfaction in that. And that the things you want come that way because you're being intentional about your yeses. And so maybe combining both of those, I would say, like say no more, you know, say the word no more often so that you can appreciate the time and give yourself compassion for when you say no to things.
100%. Yeah, sometimes we are too hard on ourselves and we don't give ourselves enough credit, and we are not patient enough. We want, especially nowadays with the social media and instant gratification, we want everything in this exact moment. So those are
Exactly.
2 awesome advice for whoever that is listening. Well, Lindsay, again, thank you so much for being here today. All your advice and your expertise into the psychology of coaching. It's been awesome to get to know a little bit more of the work that you've been doing during your career, and I think you're giving some great advice for coaches looking to improve in their careers.
Perfect. Thank you so much for a great conversation. I really enjoyed it and had fun.